The Minnesota Vikings might actually just be legit. 1 week after beating the 49ers, they absolutely crushed the Texans and CJ Stroud. They are now 3-0 and look like a good team. And more than anything, it's just been awesome to see Sam Darnold really have a good season as a guy who has clearly struggled to perform and stick around throughout his career. Now, he's looking good in Minnesota, and the win against the Texans is the perfect example of that. The Texans definitely got beat pretty bad, and really, the game couldn't have started off much worse than it did. Literally, on the first play from scrimmage, CJ Stroud had his pass tipped and picked off. The Vikings then didn't have to go too far, and Sam Darnold hit Justin Jefferson for a touchdown on just a long play, and the Texans couldn't cover Jay Jettis forever. The Texans tried to get some momentum back, but Ka'imi Fairbairn ended up missing a 54-yard field goal. It got the Vikings back in good field position, and it didn't take very long for the Vikings to score again. Jefferson had a big play, and Aaron Jones capitalized and scored on a receiving touchdown. And just like that, it was already 14-0, with the Texans just catching a couple of bad breaks. And it really felt like they just couldn't get back to normal. That was all the major fun in the first half. They both literally just alternated punts from then on out, but there was actually one really cool first down that the Texans managed to pull off, where Stephon Diggs actually threw it to Dare Ogunbowale, which was honestly pretty cool to see. Now, it definitely wasn't this inconceivable deficit for the Texans to need to make up. I mean, after all, it was just 2 scores, but it didn't help that the Texans started the game with the ball. So the Vikings got the ball to start the second half and went 77 yards in 8 plays, capped off by a Jalen Nailor touchdown. The Vikings did certainly have one of the goofiest plays you'll ever see, where he essentially had a backwards pass fumble and Brandon Powell picked it up and got a good gain actually. I have no clue how that ended up going for positive yards. And then finally, the Texans did score. Stroud threw a touchdown to Cam Akers, who was able to punch it in. That made the score 21-7, and there was definitely some reason to believe that the Texans could make a run. But then Will Reichard hit a field goal after a rare Justin Jefferson drop, and then Stroud threw another pick. The Vikings made the most of it with a Johnny Munt touchdown after a big Aaron Jones run. And at that point, that was really it. The Texans turned it over on downs twice, and Reichard added another field goal, which was actually a 58-yarder that he banged in. Davis Mills actually ended up finishing the game for the Texans because there was really no point in keeping Stroud out there. But more than anything, it was just another great game for Sam Darnold, which is just incredible to see. How can you not be happy for this guy? He ended up throwing for 181 yards and 4 touchdowns without an interception. This guy has just been dealing and really just making the most of his shot. Now, life is a bit easier when you have a guy like Justin Jefferson to throw to, and it sure is working. He had 81 yards, and then Aaron Jones just kept making plays. Jones has really been such a big part of this offense, which is just so weird because seeing him in that Vikings jersey still just doesn't make sense in my brain, but he's been great in both the run and pass game. He ended up rushing for 102 yards, but also had 46 yards and a touchdown through the air. Now, coming into this game, I did already think that Minnesota was a solid team after beating the 49ers. I just thought that the Texans were a better team, so I did not feel confident enough to pick Minnesota to come out of this game with the dub. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Not only did they come out of this game with a dub, they absolutely dominated this game. CJ Stroud looked shook the whole game. Honestly, it looked like Stroud was the one seeing ghosts. They really couldn't get it together, and Minnesota dominated on both sides of the ball. I love seeing the Vikings be good right now. And now, after beating both the 49ers and the Texans in back-to-back weeks, I feel like there's really no argument to be had if the Vikings are legit or not. This is a team that I think is going to be able to continue to win games. But I won't lie to you guys, I didn't think that was always going to be the case. At this point, it's hard to not be excited about the Vikings. I mean, I don't think many people had them starting 3-0 to start the year, myself included. You would have been looked at like you were absolutely insane if you said that before the season, especially since they had to play both the 49ers and the Texans, 2 really good teams. But the Vikings just keep winning. They had an easier week 1 matchup against the Giants, who actually turned around and beat the Browns this week, but still, I don't think either of them are too good. So the Vikings beat the Giants pretty bad as you'd expect. It ended up being 28 28-6, and the Giants didn't even score a touchdown. So that was a dominant win, but it was also the Giants. Then the next week, sure, the 49ers are kind of banged up, but that was also a good win regardless. That was a pretty close 23-17 victory, but the Vikes were up 20-7 going into the fourth quarter. They really just looked like the better team throughout the game. It was an impressive back-to-back wins, but this game was definitely the best one so far, with them just absolutely decimating the Texans, who should be really good again. Honestly, it felt like this could have just potentially been a throwaway year for the Vikings once JJ McCarthy went down. The Vikings had Kirk Cousins for so long, and they did have some good years, but they just couldn't make any deep runs. It was finally time to move on from him, especially after that Achilles injury. So the Vikings went out and signed Sam Darnold, who was more so expected to be a good bridge guy or a guy that just helps a young quarterback learn. And then the Vikings took JJ McCarthy in the first round at the NFL draft. Now, Darnold was going to be the week 1 starter no matter what, but the big question was when McCarthy would play. And if he was healthy right now, that would still be a big wonder. But now that question is gone. This is Sam Darnold's team. And honestly, that's just so cool to see. He's never actually been put into a good situation, and that might not be the case in Minnesota. Remember, he did have his issues with the Jets, but it was also the Jets. Nobody has been quite good with the Jets as a young quarterback, but Darnold also just wasn't that good. He then went on to the Panthers after the Jets decided to move on to Zach Wilson, and that was a mess too. But again, it was a bad team. Then last year, he was actually the backup to Brock Purdy in San Francisco and only started a single time, so he didn't really have much asked of him. And now here we are. Darnold is a starter again, and he's on pace for his best year in the league. He has already thrown 8 touchdowns. For context, he threw only 9 in both 2020 and 2021, and his most recent double-digit touchdown season was all the way back in 2019, his best year on the Jets. And even then, he still didn't have 20. I honestly can't tell you guys just how stoked I am for Sam Darnold. Now, when he was with the Jets, obviously I was hoping that he would lose as a New England Patriots fan, but still, he was really fun to watch in college, and we all knew that he had the tools to become a decent NFL quarterback, but was really never given the opportunity in the NFL. The Jets were an absolute dumpster fire Adam Gase situation, and then he went to the Panthers, who, let's be honest, are still terrible. Granted, Andy Dalton looked pretty good this week, am I right, guys? Bryce Young is a problem. But still, now Sam Darnold is in a new place, surrounded by talent with a decent offensive line, and he's showing us what we've all known this whole time, that this guy can play quarterback in the NFL. I personally was really excited to see JJ McCarthy play this year. He was also really fun to watch in college in Michigan, but frankly, I think his injury was a blessing in disguise. Sam Darnold has looked like a true leader on this team. People seem to like him, and he's making plays week in and week out. This offense is moving the ball, and there are a lot of playmakers on this team that help that happen, but Sam Darnold is playing well, and I honestly couldn't be more happy for the guy. I expected this year to be a down year for the Minnesota Vikings like many other people did. They still had talent, and they brought in guys like Aaron Jones, who have turned out to be fantastic, but I'd be lying if I said I expected this from Sam Darnold. I knew that he could play quarterback, and I knew that this is probably his best shot at showing what he could do, but I wasn't a believer yet. But now I sure as hell am, and I'm gonna be rooting for this kid all the way throughout the season. And honestly, I hope the Vikings go far this year. The Vikings are an interesting team now for sure, and Sam Darnold is a big part of that, but he no doubt has some good playmakers around him. Justin Jefferson is obviously the big one, but Aaron Jones is playing well, and it certainly helps that that offensive line is actually a pretty good unit too. You really do have to give a ton of credit to Kevin O'Connell for just how great of a job he's done there, and the fact that they've been able to fight through a lot and still be a good team speaks volumes to his ability as a coach. And I think it's important to remind you that the Vikings don't even have Jordan Addison or TJ Hawkinson right now. Those are 2 of your top 4 weapons not even playing, yet they're 3-0 and beating good teams. Then on the defensive side of the ball, they're currently missing Cody Ford's ex's potential new man, Ivan Pace, and Dallas Turner. So in theory, things should actually keep getting better for the Vikings. Next week, they get the Packers with maybe Malik Willis if Jordan Love isn't ready yet, and then they get the Jets in London before a bye week. Those are 100% games that the Vikings could win. The vibes are immaculate in Minnesota right now, but imagine the Vikings being 5-0 coming out of their bye.